I get the honor and privilege of introducing Dinesh D'Souza. Welcome to Alaska. Dinesh is a Christian apologist, a former political analyst in the Reagan White House. He's also an author of several New York Times best-selling books, a filmmaker and creator of second highest grossing political documentary. In his latest book, Stealing America, D'Souza argues that the actual villains are the progressives whose true motivations are camouflaged as compassions for a desire for social justice. And that should turn everybody's stomach. We get the privilege to watch a new trailer coming up titled Hillary's America. So let's watch.
Who are these Democrats?
It is my judgment Dinesh D'Souza was sentenced on Tuesday to spend 8 months in a confinement center.
It all began when the Obama administration tried to shut me up.
No game's all about stealing, man.
What did I learn?
All crime is about stealing. The big criminals are still at large.
Didn't see any reason to keep them.
The system doesn't go after them because they run the system. It's time to go behind the curtain and discover the soul of the Democratic Party.
50 lashes. The Democrats support slaves. This Civil Rights Act will allow colored men to sit at the same table beside the white guests.
Nominate all Democrats who are now furnishing arms to the Ku Klux Klan.
To the Democratic Party.
Why has all this been swept under the rug?
To cover the tracks of the Democratic Party.
And we're not even talking about ancient history.
The racism continued well into the 20th century.
And as long as a black man continues to ravage our white women, we will continue to lynch him. You gotta give him a little something.
Plantation politics.
The Democrats went from slavery to enslavement.
Corrupt big city bosses, that's how you get corrupt unions.
What does progressive actually mean?
Social engineering and social control.
The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it.
The opening video of the Democratic Convention in 2012, government is the one thing we all belong to. No, government belongs to us. We don't belong to it.
What are these Democrats hiding?
This is about buying and selling influence by foreign oligarchs and foreign governments. When you follow the money, there are very, very few coincidences.
What if the goal of the Democratic Party is to steal the most valuable thing the world has ever produced? What if their plan is to steal America? Who will stop them now?
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to your feet and help me welcome up the incredible Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I am thrilled and delighted to be here. How wonderful to follow both Ravi Zacharias and David Barton. I was listening intently to David's talk, And it put in mind the great need in our time for courage in politics. Aristotle says that courage is the greatest of all the virtues because it makes all the other virtues possible. You need courage to actually carry out all the other virtues. And the question I want to ask is, let's say we have courage. How do we actually exercise it? What do we actually do? Here we are in Alaska, a little removed, one may say, from the mainland, from the middle of things. Here we are in this auditorium. And one question that crosses my mind is, what if we, just us, in this room, decided to mobilize and do something to change our country? What is it that we would actually do? So I'd like to talk a little bit about my own experience in this area, my own journey, if you will. Then want to try to diagnose what I think is the heart of the problem. But I want to then leave you with a couple of very concrete and specific ways to become, well, I'm going to call it a very dangerous Christian, or a very dangerous American. In other words, equipped in such a way that you are a bit of a nightmare to the people that you come across because you know what to do and you're willing to carry it out. For me, this has been a very eventful year. Charles Dickens begins one of his books, A Tale of Two Cities, by saying it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. For me, it has been the best of times. I actually got married. My wife Debbie's here. But it's also been a trying year. It's been a trying year because in some ways it's been a year that has shaken my patriotism as an American. I came to the United States as an immigrant from India, and I remember that sort of strange feeling that came over me at the age of 17 when I first flew over the United States. I saw New York City, the skyline, the Statue of Liberty, and I knew intuitively even then that my life was going to be completely different from that moment on. It was going to be completely different because I was moving from the margin of the world to the center. And it was going to be different because if I stayed in America, I would be able to do things with my life that would never have been possible if I had remained in India. In America, I've seen in my own life the fulfillment of the American dream. An American dream not just to be successful, but an American dream to be the architect of your own destiny. To me, the great power of America is that we are here in this country in the driver's seat of our own life. And to see that played out in my life has been a great exhilaration, a great thrill. But then just about a year ago, I stood in an American courtroom and heard a bailiff very sternly bark out the phrase, the United States of America versus Dinesh D'Souza. Wow. If you're an immigrant and you're going through that kind of a battle, by the way, when the federal government opens up against you, you have no idea what that means. It means dozens of FBI agents who go through your tax records, your bank records, read all your books, interview everyone that ever knew you. They basically collect an ammunition file against you to deploy. So it's a very intimidating phenomenon. And as I say, for an immigrant, it sends a chill down your spine. This was, by the way, I should tell you for a moment about my heinous crime, which involved exceeding the campaign finance laws. The campaign finance laws set a campaign finance limit of $10,000. By the way, there are all kinds of ways around those laws. Obama, Hillary, they go to fundraisers where you can give them $25,000 by just writing a check. But technically, you don't write it to them, you write it to a PAC so you're not really giving it to them. In any case, I was, although in political life for a long time, kind of naive or innocent about this. A friend of mine was running for the Senate in New York. This is someone I've known for 25 years, Wendy Long. She went to Dartmouth with me years ago. And so I wrote her a check for, I made the campaign finance contribution. And then I made this movie, 2016, about Obama. And so 4 years ago, I was bopping around the country promoting my film. And my friend Wendy was calling me every second day, Dinesh, can you come speak in Scarsdale? Can you come to upstate New York? There's a bunch of Indian doctors I want you to meet. I think they'll give money to my campaign. They're Indian, you're Indian, get it? So all of this was kind of going on. And so I wanted to help my friend, and I didn't know how to, so I came up with the cockamamie scheme. I told two of my friends, okay, well, you write our check for $10,000, and I'll reimburse you. This is not allowed under the campaign finance law. But there is no person in American history who has been actually prosecuted or sent to jail for this offense as long as there is no corruption. Corruption means you're giving the money to buy an office or to get something back. In this case, I wasn't doing that. Even the prosecution didn't claim I was. In fact, the candidate didn't even know I did it. So, nevertheless, as a consequence of exceeding the campaign finance laws, I was prosecuted as a felon by the Obama administration and put into a very serious case in New York. Now, interestingly, the judge was a Clinton appointee, and he sentenced me to 8 months in overnight confinement in a confinement center. Confinement center is a kind of prison facility. It's under the supervision of the Bureau of Prisons, but I only stayed there overnight. I was released in the day to go work, and but I checked in at 8 p.m. and I checked out in the morning. 8 months. Now, interestingly, about the same time my case was making its way to the court, another guy, a guy named Sant Chatwal, Asian Indian guy. We Asian Indians are here to specialize in campaign finance violations. Anyway, so this guy, he gave $180,000 in straw donations, meaning using surrogates, to Hillary Clinton and a whole slew of Democrats. He was hauled up before a judge in New York. No prison, no confinement, just community service and a fine. Now, and this guy was also found guilty of witness tampering and corruption. He was actually boasting that the reason he was doing this is because if you don't buy the politician, they'll never do what you want. So this was the very reason the campaign finance laws were put into effect. Now, why do I tell you this? I tell you this because what we are dealing with here is the core issue of American politics, which is the issue of justice. Justice. Justice is not just a matter of did you break the law. Justice begins there, but it doesn't end there. Justice is also a matter of is the penalty proportioned to the crime. Justice is also a matter of if there are other guys who did roughly the same thing, do they get roughly the same penalty? So here is a case where progressive justice turns out to be a bit of a sham. In other words, the Obama guys talk about justice, but when it actually comes to justice, that's not what they're about at all. And this is important for us to know because as Republicans, as conservatives, very often we don't even focus on justice. We focus on freedom. Our idea is liberty. So when we get into a political fight, we play the king, freedom. But then the other side plays the ace, which is justice, and they win the hand. Why? Because justice is actually the primary principle of any nation's politics. Aristotle puts justice at the top of the list, and I think we can see why. Because freedom is a very important principle, but it is a principle that can justify its opposite. In other words, we deprive people of freedom all the time. Not just our kids, we deprive adults of freedom. And when someone is deprived of freedom, the question you have to ask is that reasonable? But there is no such thing as good injustice. Injustice is always bad. And if you saw gross injustice on the stage right now, you would be appalled. I mean, imagine if I were to bring a small dog up here and stomp on it. A wave of revulsion would go through the room. Things may be a little different if it were a cat. So we don't actually want to concede justice. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about moral justice, political justice, and economic justice. But I want to begin with criminal justice because this was my actual experience. Now, I think the real reason I was prosecuted had nothing to do with exceeding the campaign finance laws. 4 years ago, I made the movie 2016, and that movie kind of upset the thin-skinned narcissist who currently lives in the White House. Now, when I say this on social media, people go, well, Dinesh, what makes you think that he even cared about you? Well, the reason I think that is because once the movie came out, vituperative attacks began to appear on the film and on me on a website that happened to be called BarackObama.com. The attacks were unsigned, but if you actually read them carefully, you would see that they bore that kind of signature combination of pomposity, indignation, and incoherence that we have come to unmistakably associate. But anyway, having perpetrated this heinous crime, I found myself showing up the first day at this confinement facility on the Mexican border on the south side of San Diego. And actually, I was pretty jubilant when I first got my sentence. I went on Megyn Kelly's show that night, and I said, wow, you know, even a Clinton judge decided not to send me to federal prison. I just got this confinement center, which to me sounded like a community center where I thought I would basically be setting up chairs or something. But I get over there, and there are all these guards and barbed wire fence, and the guy goes, well, what prison are you coming from? So I go, well, I didn't get prison, and this is my sentence. He goes, well, that's a pity. I go, pity? What do you mean? He goes, well, if you got prison, it would have been white-collar prison. He goes, you should see these white-collar prisons up the road at Taft up in California. He goes, it's fantastic. He goes, you meet dentists, you meet mayors, city aldermen, doctors who defrauded Medicare. Very interesting people. He goes, they got an activities director. He goes, the food isn't bad. So I go, well, what do I hear? He goes, whole different class of people. So, as it turns out, these confinement centers are transitional places where if you do a prison term, and it can be for murder, but when you get out, before you get out, they'll often send you for 60 days or 90 days to a confinement center, which is a kind of transitional place before you get back on the street. So I get in the confinement center and I realize, basically it's a lot of hoodlums. And the whole gamut of them. Armed robbery, attempted murder, domestic violence, coyotes, drug smugglers, the whole bit. And this was a little bit dicey because the vast majority, by the way, Hispanic. But I noticed that even among the Hispanics, there are all these subgroups and gangs. So the American Hispanics are called Southsiders, and they have about 3 or 4 gangs. But they're completely different from the Mexicans, who have their own gangs, very serious gangs, the Mexican mafia, this sort of thing. And so I'm, from the beginning, very reluctant to actually talk to anyone. Because I think if I talk to this guy, that guy may want to kill me. So I better stay totally to myself. But after a little while, I began to reconsider. Because I thought to myself, hey, this is pretty remarkable. I'm a conservative in a very strange land. I'm not likely to see a lot of conservatives around here. I mean, I'm not going to go around the hallway. There's Charles Krauthammer. There's George Will. No. So I'm kind of in a unique place. And I should take advantage of that and look at this as a learning opportunity. So I should I'm like an anthropologist in a strange place. I should get my notebook out and start interviewing people. So I began to do that. And over 8 months, I discovered what I'm going to call the ideology of the criminal underclass. Very interesting point of view. Now, my previous exposure to this topic was limited to 3 viewings of The Shawshank Redemption, from which I had derived the idea that most criminals insistently profess their own innocence. But in talking to these guys, I realized that that was a kind of a simplified point of view. The actual ideology of the criminal underclass is a little different and goes more like this. We're not innocent. We actually did it. But we think we are the small fry. The little guys. Actually, we consider ourselves the stupid criminals. That's why we're here. We got caught. The big fry never get caught. The big fry are out there. They're at large. The big fry are actually never pursued by the system because they run the system. And this kind of got me thinking. It got me thinking because it kind of got me re-examining the whole way I'd been thinking about politics. One thing you got to realize about guys who live in confinement centers is they live in a very limited horizon. I was lying on my bunk bed. We slept in a room about this size, 120 of us on bunk beds, and I was able to hear other guys talk. And I realized their talk was basically food, money, sleep, sex. That's kind of it. 4 topics. And it's because they see the world in a very basic, elemental way. I realized I didn't see the world that way. I didn't see the world and American politics in a more complex way. So for years I've been a writer. I was looking at American politics as a debate. It's an argument between 2 sides who have rival principles. We believe in freedom. They believe in social justice. We believe in equality of rights. They believe in equality of outcomes. And blah, blah, blah. Now, from the point of view of the criminal underclass, this whole way of looking at American politics is total and complete nonsense. The way they look at it, human beings are not actually motivated by debates. Human beings are actually motivated by things like avarice, and greed, and hatred, and lust, and revenge, and envy. And these are the actual motors of human motivation. So to look at American politics and ignore this is to put a big blinder on yourself, to miss the point. And even when I began to think about this idea about the ideology of the criminal underclass, and I say to myself, well, who cares what a bunch of criminals think? I then realized that they actually have the same view that was held by the philosopher Machiavelli. Machiavelli's view when writing about the ancient thinkers, all the way from Plato, all the way through Machiavelli. Machiavelli said, all those guys are wrong. How could they all be wrong? He says, because all of them, he says, focus on, and now I quote, imagined powers and principalities that have never in truth been known to exist. In other words, everybody else before me is writing about the world as it ought to be. Things ought to be this way. Things ought to be that way. In the confinement center, by the way, I never heard the word ought. Nothing ought to be anyway. People just want to get through the day. And Machiavelli's saying, instead of focusing on the way things ought to be, why don't we actually look at the world as it is? Why don't we actually look at the world in the face? Then we can think about what we ought to do. So I want to today talk about American politics in a little different way than we're accustomed to hearing from the candidates or on the Fox News channel or in the news or in the talk radio. A little different diagnosis, because it actually helps us to see if this is the way things actually are, this is what we can actually do. So what is the way things actually are? I want to start with Obama and Hillary. And for the last 8 years, conservatives, Republicans, we're looking at Obama, we're looking at Hillary, and what do we do? We basically are trying to decide and assess whether what they're doing makes sense, whether it's right or wrong, and if it's wrong, we try to point that out. So what's been going on for 8 years, I want to call it the Obama Education Project. We try to educate Obama about how things really are. Hey Obama, we want to remind you that Vladimir Putin used to be a KGB officer. You can't trust the guy. Hey Obama, if the mullahs in Iran say they want to build a bomb, they probably do. Hey Obama, if you have confiscatory taxes and burdensome regulations, you're likely to have problems with economic growth. And on and on. The Obama Education Project has been going on for 8 years. And our conclusion at the end of it is that Obama must be an extremely slow learner. Because he never seems to get it. Not once does he go, aha, you're right. Never saw it that way. Not once. And so it begins to occur to us that it may be that Obama isn't just dumb, but that something else is actually going on. He's about something else. He's going about a different project than we think. And our effort to educate him is kind of shouting into the wind. So what actually is going on? What is this progressive politics really all about? On the face of it, progressive politics is about social justice. Social justice. That is its core claim. That's the Democratic Party's claim to rule. If you remove social justice, they'd have no reason to exist. All their rhetoric converges on that. Inequality, that's the Bernie campaign. Social justice, that's Hillary. Fair share, that's Obama. So it's all the same thing. And this social justice is backed up by all kinds of arguments. And the arguments, well, if I go back to my confinement center, they don't call these things arguments. They call them pitches. In other words, criminals, when they go about what they do, they have a pitch. A pitch is basically a scam. So if you want to rob an old lady and take her furniture and her TV, it's really helpful if you can convince her to lift the latch on the door so you can then kick in the door. It's much easier than breaking the whole door down. But how do you convince her to lift the latch? You've got to give her a pitch. And so the Democrats have pitches. So we should answer the pitches, but not mistake what's actually going on. There's a lot of inequality in our society. Okay, but is inequality really our social problem, or is it poverty? Is inequality in of itself a bad thing? Let's say we're all in this room, and each of us, 500 of us, each of us have 10 bucks. That's $5,000. And then Daniel Ham writes a book, Harry Potter's Adventures, and puts it up for sale. And each of us comes and let's say half of us buys that book, and it costs $2 each. So we give him $2, 500 of us, and so suddenly Daniel now has $1,000. Actually, he has $1,010. 1,000 plus his original 10. A lot of inequality. He's in the 1%. But no injustice would seem to have occurred. He didn't steal our money. We happily gave him the $2 in exchange for his book. So there's inequality, but kind of where's the injustice? So inequality by itself doesn't really do the job. You need to have more cunning pitches. And historically, over the past 100 years or so, very cunning pitches have been put out there. The most cunning of them all is by Karl Marx. So Marx is dead. Marxism, you might say, is dead. But the arguments of Marx are not dead. In fact, they are the intellectual basis for a lot of arguments we hear today. If Obama stands up and says to a group of business guys, well, you didn't build that. What's he getting at? How can you say to Steve Jobs, you didn't build the iPhone? Well, who did? Well, Obama's point is actually very sophisticated, and it hinges on Marx. So I'm going to take just 1 minute to give you the Marxist pitch. The Marxist pitch is like this. Whenever you think of a business, any business, it can be a salmon business, it can be an automobile business, a computer business. Every business has got capitalists and labor. The capitalists supply capital, money. The laborers supply labor, work. And Marx says that the capitalists, for supplying capital, do deserve a return. That's called interest. Just like if you put money in the bank, you get 2%, 3%. That's interest. That's the payment for capital. So Marx goes, pay them. And then, if you run a business, it costs you money to rent a facility, to have equipment, to pay labor, wages. And Marx says those are all the costs of doing business. Costs of doing business. He goes, but I notice that when a businessman sells his product, he doesn't just try to recover the cost. He tries to get as much as the market will bear. In other words, money comes in that is more than the money that went out. And that difference, Marx calls it surplus value. We call it profit. And now Marx raises a very deep question. Who gets that? Not just who gets it, who has the right to it? Who justly has a claim to that profit? And Marx's answer is that that profit belongs 100% to labor. It doesn't belong to the capitalist at all because he's already been paid for his capital. But since labor made the product, labor did it. Labor built that. Now, this Marxist idea, what's really interesting is that we have these political debates, but the Democrats don't explicitly state their arguments, and the Republicans never explicitly refute them. So we have this weird political debate in which there's a squid-like cloud of rhetoric coming from all directions, but it's actually difficult to know what you're actually fighting about. In truth, I think Marx's distinction is completely wrong. Because if you actually look at what entrepreneurs do, and you can use Steve Jobs, for example, as an example of this, is that entrepreneurs actually don't supply capital. You think Steve Jobs used his own dough to make the iPhone? No, he went to a bank. So the capital comes from somewhere else. Venture capital firms or banks. Let's think about what Steve Jobs actually did. First of all, he came up with the idea for the iPhone. Heck of an idea. Why? Because in conventional economics, people say that entrepreneurs respond to demand. People have a demand for food. Entrepreneurs supply food. But the most successful entrepreneurs don't respond to demand. They actually anticipate the demand before it even exists. So Steve Jobs thought of the iPhone, organized it, made it, and marketed it before you knew you couldn't live without it. That's called supply-side economics. The supply comes before the demand. Then Steve Jobs hires a bunch of guys, and they go work for Apple, and he pays them. So if the iPhone makes a profit, who deserves the most of that? Is it the employees? Well, they came to work for Apple, they helped to build the iPhone, but let's remember that Jobs didn't just think of it and make it, he took all the risk. In other words, if Apple has a bad quarter, he couldn't go to the employees and say, hey guys, refund half of your paychecks. They chose to take security over risk. Jobs took the chance that if the iPhone made no money, he would make no money, because the entrepreneur gets paid at the end. So the point I'm trying to make is that all I'm getting at is that these pitches are actually bogus. They don't really work, but they're kind of clever, and they put out a lot of spin. And we, and the conservative intelligentsia is the key to this, spends a lot of time answering the pitch. But you have to recognize that what's going on is a pitch. It's a pitch to do something else. So what is that something else? Well, all crime, at the heart of it, is about theft. All crime is about theft. Murder. Guy goes to a grocery store, he wants to rob the store. The clerk is armed, so he shoots the clerk. Murder, yes, but the real goal is theft. Even rape is theft. You're taking something by force, it doesn't belong to you. That's theft. Slavery was theft. Abraham Lincoln said, slavery means you work, I eat. You force another guy to work for you for free. You're stealing the fruits of his labor. So a lot of it comes down to that simple commandment, thou shalt not steal. But what is it that the progressives and the Democrats are trying to steal? Well, I would suggest that they're trying to steal the most valuable thing that the world has ever made. And what is that? Well, think about it. What's the most valuable thing the world has ever made? Is it the airplane, the automobile, the computer, the World Wide Web? No. The most valuable thing the world has ever made is the United States of America. Why? Why? Because America is not just an invention. But if you think about it, most inventions over the last century have occurred here because America is the invention of invention. It's a whole society that encourages creativity and wealth creation. So the wealth of America is actually the total wealth of the whole country. It's not the $3 trillion federal budget. It's not the $17 trillion or $19 trillion that our economy generates every year, the GDP. No. It's if you take everything in the country, all the land, and the value of all the homes, including yours, and all the money in your savings account and your kids' college fund, and all your furniture and all your TVs, and you add it all up, that's about $90 trillion. That's one pile of dough. The Democrats, in my opinion, want to steal that. By steal, I mean control. They don't actually want to produce it. They're not socialists. In fact, if you think about it, they're way too lazy to be socialists. A socialist would nationalize the industry. I'm going to nationalize the oil industry. I'm going to go to Midland, Texas and take the oil out of the ground myself. You think Bernie wants to do that? Bernie is Rip Van Winkle. He's been on a 20-year nap. He just woke up. He just got off his neighbor's couch. This is the last thing that guy wants to do. He wants the guys in Midland to drill the oil, take it out of the ground, do fracking, do whatever they do, put all the oil in barrels, label it, price it, and then he's going to walk in and tell them what to do with it. So this is a very unusual form of socialism. It's appropriating and wanting to control the wealth of the country. Notice that under Obama, huge industries in the private sector have come under the government's thumb. It started with banking and finance, investment houses. Then it went to healthcare, 1/6 of the economy. Every hospital, every hospice, every nurse, every doctor. Then it's migrating now to energy. And then Hillary and Bernie, notice that they talk a lot about education. A huge wealth concentration. If they can get their hands on that sector, that's the next one to fall. So this is about stealing America. And it's well underway. And we seem almost powerless to stop it. We seem powerless to stop it because even when we make gains, they don't seem to do any good. And so these days, for example, the number one question when I walk around, people ask me, hey, are you for Trump or are you for Cruz? And the truth is, because I'm making this movie, I'm staying out of it. Not because I don't have an opinion, but because when I make a film, the left is going to say, this was bought and paid for by the Republican National Committee, or this is an extension of the Cruz campaign, or this was paid for by the Koch brothers. I don't want them to be able to say that, so I'm staying independent. But my point is, our focus is on the candidate. And remember, 2 years ago, our focus was, do you think the Republicans will take the Senate? If we take the Senate, we now have the Congress. So we have the Congress, they have the presidency, the courts in between, it's a draw. But we have the Congress, and now what? Nothing seems to change. People go, well, that's because Boehner's a win. McConnell's a win. Well, maybe, but those guys don't want Obama to succeed. Why are they wimps? Why do they behave that way? And the answer is that they behave that way because they're scared of the media. Because the media can destroy them. And I don't just mean the media, i.e. the New York Times and CBS News and NPR and all the networks. That's true. They're also afraid of the comedians. Because the comedians will ridicule them. And then their own friends will be embarrassed about them. And then they won't be invited to speak even here. Totally buried. So they know that. Think about it. On the left, you got Colbert, you got Jon Stewart, you got Bill Maher. Who do we have? Nobody, nobody, and nobody. So what I'm getting at here is a broader point. We're fighting in one corner of the battlefield, and the other side has occupied, the secular left, has taken over the high ground of the culture. They've taken over what I want to call the megaphones of our culture, the biggest noisemakers. And what are those? Hollywood, Broadway. As I said, the whole comedy industry. Then we have the media. Then we have education. The more elite the college, the stronger the left stranglehold on it. And then they're making deep inroads into elementary and secondary schools. So basically, they're winning because we have pretty much quit the battlefield. Well, we're fighting on the wrong battlefield. We're not even contesting their superiority in these areas. We've just let it happen. And then we see the effect of this. I mean, David Barton briefly mentioned the issue of gay marriage. Yes, gay marriage was overturned, was sustained by the Supreme Court. But that battle was begun many years ago, before we even knew it. We're waiting for somebody to come into politics, and then the churches get mobilized, and we get a petition, we get a referendum. But the gay marriage debate began when Ellen came out of the closet. And when you have the comedy show Will and Grace, it's been going on. There are 100 sitcoms that have been pushing this agenda for 20 years in our culture. And if we wonder why young people, why we lost them, that's because somebody else has been whispering into their ear every single day. In the universities, I go speak on campus. What can I do? I speak on Tuesday, I leave on Wednesday. The fat and happy liberal professor is there every day. Nobody can influence that guy. He doesn't care about the legislature, he doesn't care about the parents. He's got tenure, he doesn't even care about the administration. He certainly doesn't care about the students, they're at his mercy. He grades them, they don't grade him. So, what can we do to upset that guy's life? How do we rock his world? So, I want to now turn to our predicament, because it looks bleak, and how we can fight more effectively. Now, the first thing to remember is that our world has changed, and we need to do things in new ways. I found this out myself in my own career. I've been a writer and speaker for 25 years. The moment I made 2016, I realized that I reach an audience that I can't possibly reach through books. I'd stand in the theater in Houston, I'd see some Hispanic guy with his wife and 4 kids, and I look at that guy and he loves the movie, his tears coming on his cheek, he's applauding at the end, and I'm like, I could never reach that guy any other way but through a movie. My original idea for 2016 came from Michael Moore. He did Fahrenheit 9/11, you might remember, and dropped it in the middle of the 2004 campaign. I looked at Michael Moore, I listened to Michael Moore, and I go, if that guy can do it, how hard can it be? Now, having said that, I'm under no illusion the real power in Hollywood is not Michael Moore. It's Steven Spielberg. In other words, Hollywood's most powerful narratives don't come from documentary films. They come from romantic comedies, thrillers, animated films, horror films. In the end of the day, if you want to compete in that domain, you got to move into feature films. You got to tell powerful stories. The Bible is a story. The Bible uses the story form. I've done a lot of Christian apologetics. The Bible doesn't do apologetics. The Bible never defends its views. Genesis doesn't say, in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth, and here are 4 lines of evidence to support that thesis. The Bible just states it outright. It's super puzzling if you think about it. From a rational point of view, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. My first question, who's talking? Can't be God. It's some third guy. In the beginning God. It doesn't say in the beginning I. But no one was there. Who could it be? So, narratives, the power and importance of narratives. Now, I'm making a movie, as you saw from the trailer. I have to think strategically. When is the most effective time? I think of the movie as a kind of grenade. When is the time to take the pin out? And to me, the obvious answer is the Democratic National Convention. That's the time to release the movie. Now, we'll open the movie that week, and it'll open in, I would estimate, between 1,500 and 2,000 theaters. Here's a little piece of trivia. It's really helpful to us if you go and see the movie opening weekend and take everybody you know that weekend. No other time, that time. Why? Because all of Hollywood has its eyes trained on the success of the film in its opening. If the movie does well in opening weekend, we'll go from 1,500 theaters to 2,500 theaters. If the movie does poorly, we'll go from 1,500 to 800 theaters. The next week. So if you say, I want this movie to be seen by independents, you have a way to make that happen. You can put fuel into our rocket by going opening weekend. And remember, this is not something that's going to cost you $1,000 or $500. $10. And if you can buy tickets for 8 high school kids and take them, this is the way to actually strategically use your influence, because it multiplies our impact. Or in an organized way, our movie comes out, it'll come out in July, but it'll come out in DVD in October. Now, you might say, how can we as a group influence the election? And I hear people all the time. I speak before the Women's Republican group in Dallas, Texas. They go, well, gee, what can we do? We're in a red state. We know the outcome over here. Oh, in California, what can we do? We're in California. California's a lost cause. Maybe, but there's actually something you can do. Because the truth of it is, there are approximately 1.5 million voters who decide the election, and they live in the swing states, and their names and addresses are actually known to us. We actually have them. So, when the film comes out in DVD, if you watch it, and if you agree it's a powerful type of messaging that you won't hear from the RNC, or most likely from any of the PACs, and you decide that you want to do something, well, as a group you can say, all right, we will actually get 10,000 DVDs and drop them into the mailboxes of 10,000 independent voters in Ohio. And that is called using your influence strategically, dropping it where it counts, aiming it. This is like David aiming his slingshot. Not the shotgun approach, the slingshot approach. Now, how does the slingshot approach succeed? 2 years ago, my book America was in the bookstores. It had just come out, and the movie America was coming out 2 weeks later. And the retail giant Costco had actually ordered 25,000 copies of my book, which were distributed in Costco's all around the country. And, but one fine day, an edict came down, and all my books, all the America books, were pulled from every Costco in the United States on one day. And it was clearly not a local decision because this happened nationwide. and no one even knew about it. My publisher didn't know about it. But there was a guy who worked in Costco, and he just thought it was really odd because the book had just come out. And someone was going around collecting all the copies, putting them into a bin and removing them, and then he made a few calls and he realized this was happening everywhere. So he called a friend of his who was a writer, a journalist on a small website called World Net Daily. And so World Net Daily writes an article about my book being yanked from Costco, and this was right around the 4th of July, so it was sort of immigrants' book being yanked about America on the 4th of July. Anyway, it created a stir, and about 1,000 people were railing on Costco and saying, this is awful, this is censorship, this is terrible, why is the corporation playing politics? This was a kind of, I want to call it an online mob. But it's an online mob in the wrong place. Why? Because what the hell does Costco care about World Net Daily? Then, in a very important moment in the history of modern social media, someone in the online mob decided, we're in the wrong place, fellas. Let's move to the Costco website. Suddenly the snowball begins to roll to Costco, picking up some snow along the way, so by the time it gets to Costco, it now happens 24 hours later to be 17,000 people, a much bigger number to be sure, but still not that big. 17,000 people. But these 17,000 people in the space of 24 hours, I'm speaking very candidly here, so I don't want to mince words, basically destroyed the entire Costco site. By destroyed, I don't mean they did any vandalism, they didn't do anything improper. All they did was they went to every product. In Costco, when you buy a product, you can rate it. A pair of pants, a barbecue grill, a bottle of wine. Except now, if you went to the Costco site, you wouldn't see any ratings. All you would see are very well-dressed people of all ages from all parts of the country cutting up their Costco card. And basically saying, cut your card into little pieces and send it to the CEO. And the CEO got hundreds of pieces of Costco cards being returned. And it was so traumatic for him that the man was actually reduced to tears. I know because he had an emergency meeting with me, and I was sitting across from him, and his first words out of his mouth was, Dinesh, you are destroying Costco. A multi-billion-dollar corporation. But he wasn't totally kidding, because his board was meeting to discuss his own fate as the CEO. Why? Because Costco does 1/2 of its global business on its website. No company can afford to have its own customers destroying its own site. So Costco was in a panic. No sooner did my plane land back in San Diego than Costco.
David Barton, Dinesh D'Souza. I'll open this with a question that I have, which came from my speech at the beginning of the day. And my speech was about 5 different factions that kind of make up the non-left. People who don't believe that all good things come from government, that government does all things or should do all things. These are members of a coalition of people, which is different than what we've had before. Before, we had a very solid set of principles upon which everybody agreed. Once you didn't agree with 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the number was, you fell out and then you sort of dropped out of politics, which is kind of where we are now. We have a lot of distrust and there's a lot of cultural changes. So my question to you two is, we don't necessarily have this foundational idea. A lot of people have been brought up without the Judeo-Christian foundation in their household. They just don't understand it. They're not really sure what a Christian is saying when they're talking. They're not sure where they're coming from. They know they don't like it because they've had 40 years of brainwashing going on in school and in media or wherever they get it from. So my question to you is, upon what do we form the coalition for a non-left, i.e. conservative, or a new conservative movement? And if you guys have thoughts on that, I'd be interested in both of you guys.
Hey Dave, how are we doing
The last successful conservative coalition was the Reagan coalition, which was based upon, as I understand it, 3 principles. The first one was there are some bad guys in the world, and no amount of lengthy conversations with them is going to prevent them from being bad. And therefore force is necessary, although regrettable, component of foreign policy. The United States, at the end of the day, doesn't want to occupy other countries, but our foreign policy is essentially don't bomb us and we'd like to trade with you. That's pretty much it. In domestic policy, the basic idea was that a free market with a lot of opportunity, ladders of opportunity, that's what the Republican Party stands for. Creating a framework in which people can climb the ladder to the best of their abilities. We all recognize that luck and other things play a role in life, but you have a chance to try. And finally, in social policy, the basic idea was that we don't just want the free society, we also want the decent society. In other words, freedom is not neutral as to its content. We want to, when the founders said the American dream, they didn't just mean that you have the right to choose. If 400 million Americans chose to become pornographers, the American dream would not be a success. In other words, the content of your choice matters. And this was the Reagan coalition. And I don't for the life of me think we need to change it. In other words, those ideas remain extremely powerful and extremely popular in the country today. We could win elections on them in a minute. But I don't even hear those ideas articulated. I've never heard a Republican in 20 years make an effective moral defense of these three principles. At the core level, at the commonsensical level, I never hear it. So part of the responsibility, I think, falls on our side. Even with young people. People say, like, young people are rejecting conservatism. No, young people never hear it. They're not exposed to it. They don't even know what it is. And we have to bear some responsibility for that, for not having done that.
I would say that that's in its core is the problem. We've gone from a soundbite at the time of Nixon being 68 seconds, broadcast soundbite, today is under 6 seconds. And so how do you communicate a message in under 6 seconds? And we not only talk in sound bites, we think in sound bites. And so we've not done a good job of laying out and articulating why we do it. And to do that, it actually takes some relationships and some time. I'm going to go back to my days when I was with the Republican Party in Texas, helping run the party, and we had different factions that would fight with one another. The Chamber of Commerce business faction is always opposed to the social conservative faction. That tends to be one of the splitting lines within the Republican Party, social conservatives versus others versus moderates, etc. And the way we were able to overcome in Texas, and the reason it's a problem to us in the party in Texas was because conservatives will give you time and effort and labor, but they don't give you much money. Moderates will give you a lot of money, but they never give you time, effort, and labor. And it takes both of those to get candidates elected. And so what we were able to do is we went to the business community and said, you know, here's the top 22 state representatives in the last election that fought for your issues. Here's the top 22 best economic votes you had. Oh, by the way, 21 of these guys are hardcore social conservatives. So it actually is very clear that if you get someone who's a consistent conservative in both social and economic issues, it's better for your interest. So we actually got the Chamber of Commerce business community to contribute to social conservatives who were into life and marriage and liberty and other things, not because they agreed with those issues, because they didn't, but they agreed with the results that they got when they got a true conservative in there. And so we were able to bring that coalition together. We did a lot of record-setting things in Texas. We ended up becoming a Republican state for the first time in 130 years, but it was touching those coalitions, talking to them, offering them evidence that shows why what they're after is good. And this is not a new fight. We've actually had this fight all the way back in the founding era. And when Ben Franklin was an ambassador in France, France was very anti-religion, anti-morals, anti-marriage, etc. And they were immigrating to America like crazy. And Franklin in 1780 did a piece on if you're going to immigrate to America from France, here's what you need to know about America. I went through it. And so a lot of those who came here had a different set of morals. And one of them was Thomas Paine, who came here in 1774, got set up in business with Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush. 1776 did Common Sense that launched him. So he'd come out of that European thinking, and when he finally did The Age of Greece in 1794 is when it was published. He was working on it for years before. He sent a rough draft manuscript to that to Franklin, who'd helped bring him to America in the first place. And the rough draft manuscript, he said, I like God, but I hate religion. I hate Christianity particularly. This is really terrible stuff. And he attacked religion throughout. And Franklin took that piece, and two things back to him were really powerful. He said, Thomas, understand what you're doing here. He said, I would first advise you to burn this piece before seen by anybody else. This is not going to be a good outcome on this. He said, if men are so wicked with religion, what would they be without it? You don't like religion. Well, look what happens in secular nations where you have no religion, no religious values. And he said, by the way, part of your argument is that I hate religion and I'm a really good guy. I use loyalty, I use integrity, I use truthfulness and honor. And Franklin said, yeah, you did, but you got to remember that you were educated in all those values in your Christian education that you had. Just the fact that you're secular now doesn't mean the values are bad. And so it is with my neighbor. If my neighbor's an atheist, great. But if he'll live by the Ten Commandments, he'll make a great neighbor. If he won't steal my wife and take my property and kill me, etc., those are values to live by. And so that was the argument that Franklin used even at that time. And when Paine came out, he disregarded Franklin's advice, came out and attacked religion. That was the argument used on the other side. It's not religion's not perfect, but the values, when they're applied, produce a very civil society that we all like. And that's what Paine lost so much. So I think there's coalition building that goes in how you argue. You have to find common ground to people you're touching, and there's nearly always common ground between us and them, but pragmatics also work. You can show results, as we did with Chamber of Commerce, who don't like socially conservative values, but you get the results you want economically when you elect our guys to office, and that worked for them as well.
Thank you. Please come up and pose a question. By the way, I became the new owner of this fancy Samsung thingy here. I don't know if it's white. It's like a 7-inch thing. Anybody lose one of these? No? Not yet? All right. Well, if you do find that you don't have it, it doesn't fit in a... Oh, it's got a person's name on it. I didn't think to do that. That's young people. Oh, you Esperanza Lanfear. Oh, okay, good. Very good, Mike Kunis.
All right, I got it. You touched on incrementalism, and that, and I don't know if you know, here in Alaska, probably one of the best examples of incrementalism was back Tony Knowles' era. This is several governors ago. We didn't have concealed carry, so we did a concealed carry permit that actually the first one that got passed, actually there was more places you could carry in the open than you could carry concealed. And it was very ordinance, there was a lot of problems with it, but a lot of us, myself included, got our concealed carry permit. We went through that process. Then the next session, they made some fixes, made it less onerous. And then the next session, they fixed it some more, and again, and again, and again. And Tony Knowles vetoed 3 of them, I think, and the veto override happened on every one of them. So we won, and we kept on winning, and we kept on winning, to the point now we're constitutional carry. We don't need a permit, we can carry concealed, and there's only 5 places we can. So that's incrementalism at work in Alaska. Question is, there's a lot of incrementalization that we could do to fix this nation. But with the Obama, with the problems that we got splits, we got the McConnells, we got all these things. Do we have enough time to incrementalize? Do we have to even go harder now? And how do we incrementalize and charge forward at the same time?
Well, let's recognize that the left practices incrementalism, bad incrementalism on its side. In the 1986 tax reform, as a result of Reagan, this tax reform of 83 and then the 86 Act, the top marginal tax rate in this country came down from 70% to 28%. That was not incrementalism, that was a revolution. And we have it here in America. Now the left realized that they cannot undo that. There's no way they could take it. Right now they've taken it up to 39.5%. But it's taken them 4 elections to get there. So they slowly pushed the top rate up. and they've gone from 28 to 39. They're still a long way from 70. So what they do now, if they want to go higher, is they start creating the intellectual ground for 70. So they'll say things like, well, during World War II, we had 80. The top rate was 80%, it was wartime. And so they try to get the human mind around that ridiculous number where you make, 100 cents and they take 80 cents on the dollar. They have to get people used to that, but they still won't get 80. They're going to move up and up and up and up. That's why when Obama says fair share, he never said what the fair share is. Because if he was an honest liberal, he would at least tell you in what society he would be a conservative. Meaning, I want to raise taxes, and I think 40% is fair. And at 40%, I don't want to raise taxes anymore because everyone is paying their fair share, and then I will get out of politics and go do something else. No, because to him, he wants to keep moving. Once you get to 40, he's going to go for 50. And once you agree to 50, he'll go to 60. So they can't reveal where they actually want to go. So on both sides, you've got this incrementalism, and the reason for the incrementalism is we live in a democratic society where you have to win people over to your side. You need consent to be able to move forward. If you overreach, then you'll be defeated the next time around, and all your hard work will be undone. That's why incrementalism is necessary. So for example, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He didn't have the coalition. Abolitionism could not have carried the day. So Lincoln was a moderate, saying, he even said to the South, people don't know this, I will agree to a constitutional amendment to keep slavery in the South, in every state in which it now exists. I will merely block it from the new territories. Lincoln agreed to this, to avert the Civil War. Incrementalism.
The other thing that I would throw on that is, and I'm just going to go ahead and kick that ant's nest. Let's see what happens. From my standpoint, theologically, it doesn't matter to me when the Lord comes back, and I've got to stop thinking about how fast He's coming back. We're told to live as though it's a thief in the night, but because we think we have a short amount of time, it changes our strategy. And that shouldn't be changed. If the Lord comes back right now and screws up every plan I've got, that's really good. But in case He doesn't, I'm going to keep planning as though it may be 100 years, 200, 300 years. And so what happens is there are certain principles that are fairly timeless. Incrementalism is one of them. I marvel at the fact that back in the 1870s and 1880s, Robert Ingersoll, who was known as the national evangelist for atheism, Robert Ingersoll was derided by the public, by the media. Everybody said he's nuts. But he said, I've got this 80-year plan, and I know I'll be dead by the time it happens, but there's ways we can secularize education in America. And there's ways that we can move to graded education. There's ways we can move progressivism. And he laid out an 80-year plan. Man, we can't lay out an 80-day plan for most conservatives. And so we're always thinking about how short time is, and they never think that way. They're willing to say, because for them, they're here for however long they're here, and they're going to pass it on to the next generation through the same philosophy. So having said that, I think that in the Christian church, our eschatology has gotten in the way of how we look at things. Historically, this nation screwed up. You know what? It was screwed up in 1856. It was screwed up several other times as well. We're not yet at the point, we've not yet made it as bad as they've had it several other times in our own nation's history. We've always been able to come back, and even if I didn't have that example, how many times did Israel fall off the face of the map and God brought them back? I mean, they were terrible at what they did. They're sacrificing their kids, they're burning their kids, they're burning wives, and God still brings them back. So from my standpoint, it's not how much time we have, it's just I'm going to do it until I run out of time. And when I'm out of here, my kids are going to do it after me. I want to make sure they get trained to do it right. So that's the other side, is I wouldn't think in terms of how much time we have or don't have. I would think in terms of I'm going to outlast you. I'm going to make sure my philosophy is the last one standing. And if that takes 2,000 years, I'm going to do that. And again, if Christ comes back and screws up everything I've got planned, that's great. But if He doesn't, at least we will have something to pass on at that point in time. So I'm going to jump into no theology there for a minute and back off. But I think we've got to change the way we think about it as conservatives, and particularly about people's faith. It's not up to us when He comes back, and it doesn't matter. In the meantime, we've got to be faithful. And as He said, occupy till I come. And that means without end. Just keep going.
I'm sure glad you kicked me in here before I got here. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name's Clayton Trotter, and I am a professor in the College of Business Administration here at the University of Alaska Anchorage.
He's a Texan, by the way.
And don't hold it against me, or him. I want to say two things, first of all, if you don't mind. First of all, the desire for knowledge and understanding and wisdom among Alaska students at the University of Alaska Anchorage is commendable. They're some of the best students I've ever had, and I've been teaching for 24 years. Now, having said that, the level of knowledge about history, and certainly about scripture among my students, kind of needs something, okay? I want those in this room, though. Here I am asking them questions. I apologize. I'm falling into being a professor, but I want to ask a question to the audience. How many of you are grandparents in here? Would you raise your hand? Okay. And I look around this room, and I don't see a whole lot of millennials. And so my question, I guess, is, how does a group like this reach out to the students I'm teaching at the university, and more importantly, to our own grandchildren? And then that's one question. And then the other question is, would you please explain to us how much money $19 trillion is? Those two questions. Thank you very much.
With regard to young people, young people are naturally idealistic. I think it's a tactical mistake for us as conservatives to make the argument, gee, you're a liberal because you're young and stupid and idealistic. Just wait until you're 40 and super jaded, like us, and then you'll begin to see things our way. No, we actually need to tap into their idealism and make it work for us. We don't tend to do that. I also think that our culture has shifted, and it shifted, use the word duty. And duty is a word that should inspire and motivate people to be excited about it. Because in other words, it's my duty to my country, so I'm going to sign up for the Marines. I want duty, so to speak. We have raised a generation for which the term duty is a burden. The last thing you want is duties. You want rights, you don't want duties. So this has put things like the Ten Commandments. Founders supported all kinds of freedoms, but not for a moment did they support moral freedom. They believe that there's a moral order in the universe that's external to us, that makes claims on us, and our job is to live by the edicts of it. Whatever our theology, they agreed on morality. And so this is how people of different theology could come together because they had moral ground in common. I think what shifted since the 60s is this sort of, the young people are more emotional, they're more visual, they are more oriented to self-fulfillment. Now, ironically, this new medium of movies is tailor-made for them because when you think about, the medium is very important. A book appeals to your brain. You read a book and you're reading it in a sense in your mind. If you see a play, it appeals to your ear. You're listening, and dialogue is the most important thing in a play because you can't change the scene that much. You can do a stage and then everyone talks for 2 hours. In a movie, it's your eyes, and your ears, and your head, and your heart. And a lot of conservative and Christian movies bomb because the people who make them are trying to do messaging. Dinesh, you got to make a movie on Obamacare. But nobody goes to the movie for messaging. People go to the movie for entertainment. And they go to the movie to be moved. They don't even want their character. People say, well, I'm writing a script. I want my character to experience love and excitement and this and that. But people go to the movies not so that the characters can experience those things, but so that they can experience those things. So to make a movie, you have to deliver what movies deliver. You have to deliver an emotional experience that moves somebody at the core. Now, if you do that, you can put in all kinds of messaging and people will happily digest it. So Hollywood knows that. And so they will do all kinds of messaging in their movies, but they understand the point of a movie. We need to understand the point of a movie and we'll make better movies. So you sometimes have to shift and speak to young people in their own language, and what I'm saying now is that their language is different. they're less likely to read a 300-page book, and they're more likely to want to go see a movie. Now, our people and our team kind of know this, but they think all kinds of rubbish around it. So I'll go see some CEO, or I'll say, look, would you like to help me get this movie to independent voters? And he'll say something preposterous like, Dinesh, nobody watches movies anymore. Young people aren't into movies. Can you reduce the concept of your movie to a 90-second video? And I say, no, I can't do that. An Indian guy is accusing the President of the United States of being an anti-colonialist. How can I put that in a 90-second video? Who's going to change their mind based on that? No. Now, I make 90-second videos. I call them trailers. You saw one of them. So the videos are important, but they drive people to the movie. People change. You can go to a movie and come out with a little different life experience than you went in. That's never true from a YouTube video. So if we're smart again about it, we will see that there are new mediums. They're not that hard to reach. They're all out there. They're easy to navigate. And so what I do is we're a team. We make these movies. We're about 10 of us. Most of these guys are in their 20s. But there are a couple of us old guys, and we basically run the show. But we tap their creativity, and we reach young people. And so young people aren't that hard to reach. You just have to figure out how to talk to them.
I was talking earlier about revivals, and every one we've had, the reason you get such opposition from the religious community is revivals always do something new that people aren't used to. That's the opposition. We've never done it that way. We've always done it this way. And what you get is a conflict. This is how we've always done it. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm used to. And then here comes George Whitfield. He doesn't preach in churches anymore. He goes out in pastures and fields, and he gets people together that happen to like each other. And he gets denominations to cross lines and go out. Well, we've never done that before. And so he gets attacked, mostly by the preachers. They would literally have their people from the church stand in the trees and pee on him. They would pelt him with all sorts of garbage and rocks and vegetables. And there was preachers doing that to Whitfield. I say that to say this. Jesus talked about how that there's old wineskins and new wineskins. And new wineskins come along, they're soft, they're flexible, and he said you can't pour new wine in old wineskins because they're so brittle, it'll bust the bag, and it's gone. And I say that because I have made a commitment. I'm going to be a new wineskin, and I'm going to figure out how things are done in the next generation. I may not be able to do it, but I'm going to understand it so that I don't reject how it's done. And that becomes real crucial if I'm going to connect with the next generation. For example, Chi Alpha, we had Chi Alpha mentioned here earlier, UAA, the group where all these kids are becoming Christians. Chi Alpha, I was speaking at their national thing recently, and they had done, and this is actually about 5 years ago, they had done a survey. They have 200 chapters on secular universities across America, these Christian kids, and they say, how do you want to be communicated with? And the top 8 ways that these kids want to be communicated with, the last on the list was email. And they said, we only use email with really old people. We can't even get the Republican Party to send emails out. They're still doing mail, snail mail. So, and now in the last 5 years, email will be about number 24 on the list. It's way the heck down there. So if you're going to connect, you have to be willing to be flexible. The other thing I found about millennials is they're relational. And if they find out you're genuine and true and willing to spend some time with them, then it makes a lot of difference. The other thing that conservatives have a problem with, and in my generation we have what we call the generation gap. You don't hear that now because they will cross the generational lines if you're genuine, if you have a relationship, if you talk to them honestly, listen to them, not just preach at them. The other problem that we as conservatives have is we've accumulated a lot of knowledge over however many years we've got. I've got some white hair, so I've had a few years, and we want to give it to them all in one sitting. And you cannot do that. You have to give it to them a little at a time. So when I speak at universities and law schools, I know what they've been taught, and I'll always pick 2 or 3 things that they think they know, and I'll just shoot those down. And I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to convert them to everything. All I've done is raise enough questions with them that they've seen that some of what they believe is not accurate, and so therefore they're a lot more open to saying, well, how about this? And so it's a slow process. It's a relational process. And if you're looking to do something with that generation and mentoring, it's going to take time, it's going to take listening, it's going to take you not giving them the whole load at one shot, it's going to take little bite-sized stuff. We're told in Hebrews that there's eating meat, but there's also drinking milk, and these guys are going to be drinking milk for a long time, and you have to start it slow. So that's the other way that I have found you can touch millennials, bring them along. I have a lot of folks millennials that we mentor, but it's a slow process.